He has worked on, I think, just about every Republican presidential campaign since then, or close to it. He's known as a dirty trickster. He may have pulled a dirty trick or two, maybe, Roger, in the past. Maybe. A little bit, one or two. He's known Donald Trump for a long, long time. Very close advisor. He was the first one to suggest that Donald Trump run for president back in, that was 88, right, Roger? Back in 1988. That's when he planted the seed in the mind of Donald Trump that maybe this man could become president. He saw this a long time ago. And look where we are now, today. Now, you will see Roger on social media, you will see him on television, you'll see him in all kinds of places, including, I understand, testifying before a House committee in just a couple of weeks on this whole Russian collusion stuff. And I think he may talk a little bit about that. He might be coaxed into it. I can't think of a better way to close out this portion of our conference before we go to dinner tonight than to introduce Roger Stone. Get me Roger Stone up here right now. Roger, come on up. You want to use a handheld or a podium?
Thank you very much. I want to take this opportunity to announce that I will be leaving political consulting to become a tester for Joe Hoff out at the Bunny Ranch. So Chuck said when he invited me I could speak about anything I wanted. And I thought long and hard about what I wanted to talk about today. I'm going to talk about my scheduled appearance before the House Intelligence Committee. I'm still trying to figure out why they call it that, which is now scheduled for the 26th of this month. Now, the Democrats on that committee have not had any reticence about showboating, hot dogging, and their efforts to malign me in public hearings, saying numerous things that are demonstrably, provably not true. But now, of course, they want me to testify in closed session. They're missing what could be really, really great television. And I'm anxious to confront Congressman Adam Schiff. This guy's a real Schiff head. I mean, this guy is so full of Schiff, his eyes are brown. Although you can always tell when he's lying, his lips are moving. In all seriousness, this is going to be an epic clash because the claim of Russian collusion to elect Donald Trump is a hoax. It's a fairy tale. It's a fraud. It's a blatant falsehood. It is a canard. Donald Trump Jr. met with a Russian lawyer. There's nothing improper or illegal about that. In fact, the fact that she got into the country without a visa, the fact that we have pictures of her at Hillary Clinton demonstrations or in, God forbid, John McCain's office, tell me it was a setup. That's what it smells like to me. Now, they call me a dirty trickster. One man's dirty trickster is another man's freedom fighter. One man's dirty trick is another man's civic participation. The truth is, I've never done anything as a political operative that is a violation of the law or is beyond the bounds of what my competitors have done, both Republican and Democrat. So this is a moniker that has been hung on me mostly by Democrats I have beaten the crap out of. But when I thought about what I wanted to talk to you about today, I figured it out on the way over here. I want to talk to you about Jeff Sessions, the Attorney General of the United States. What's wrong with this man? Is he sleeping? Has he been compromised? Or is he just incompetent? What can you say about a Justice Department that persecutes a patriot like Joe Arpaio, who's done nothing wrong other than enforce the law of the United States? What do you say about a Trump Justice Department that's in court today fighting against the release of Hillary Clinton's emails? Mr. Attorney General, are you asleep? Have you forgotten the oath of office that you took to uphold the law? What can you say about an attorney general who comes to Nevada and praises the prosecution as they deny the due process rights of the Bundy ranchers and their supporters? When a federal judge tells the Bundys, no, you can't mount a First, Second, or Fourth Amendment defense. No, you cannot call witnesses in your defense. No, your lawyers cannot sum up your case. Well, it seems to me that Judge Gloria Navarro is saying, Constitution? We don't need your stinking Constitution. It's an affront to the Constitution and the American people. In November, the super secret FISA court, generally a rubber stamp for the federal government, declared without any question that there was illegal surveillance of at least 30,000 Americans for political purposes. Where is Jeff Sessions? Clapper, Rice, Brennan, Rogers. Why have these people not been indicted? And then there is the question of whether our president was surveilled himself. In fact, Mr. Clapper, who was the director of intelligence under President Obama, testified for the Congress in 2015 and said under oath that indeed there was widespread surveillance. And this did, in fact, include Donald Trump and others, including yours truly. So where again is our Attorney General? Why, I can tell you, he's too busy out wanting to bust people for smoking medicinal marijuana. There's a burning issue he needs to address himself to. He's too busy putting forward an asset forfeiture program that would make Adolf Hitler proud. This is where they take your stuff and sell it before you've been convicted of a crime. Clearly unconstitutional. And then, of course, there's the Clinton Foundation. The Clinton Foundation is not a charity, it's a slush fund for grifters. It's a vehicle for the facilitation of multi-million-dollar bribes, where Hillary Clinton, and in some cases her husband, took millions of dollars in return for governmental decisions, but they're not facing an indictment like Sheriff Joe. No, the Justice Department seems to overlook these crimes. Let's be as clear as we possibly can. It's time for Jeff Sessions to go. We need an Attorney General who's committed to the rule of law. We need an Attorney General who understands that the crimes and excesses of the Obama and the Clinton years need to be prosecuted. We need somebody who's committed to the president's agenda. Sadly, that is not Jeff Sessions. Well, my nominee, I'd take Judge Andrew Napolitano for Attorney General of the United States. Now, my hat's off to John Podesta. In all honesty, the invention of the claim that Donald Trump was in bed with the Russians is genius, meant to distract from the fact that there was a presidential candidate in the last election in bed with the Russians. There was a presidential candidate whose top aides, John and Tony Podesta, were being paid literally millions by the oligarchs around Putin. There was a presidential candidate who pocketed hundreds of thousands of dollars of speaking fees from the Russians, but that candidate was Hillary Rodham Clinton. If they want to look into the question of collusion with a foreign power, well, then perhaps they should be looking at the Ukrainian efforts to help Hillary Clinton in the election. Why? Because it's the Ukrainians who are currently selling missile technology to the North Koreans. Has anybody noticed that suddenly their rockets seem to be getting a little further? Their technology seems to improve? So there is a serious question about collusion from a foreign power, but it doesn't have to do or pertain to Donald Trump and his family or his friends or his staff or his supporter, because they are empty-handed. This is a scandal without evidence. This is a case with no clues. And they have been beating this dead horse to the point now that they have to have the hearings behind closed doors because it will be such a humiliating embarrassment to them. So when Congressman Adam Schiff says, Stone predicted the hacking of John Podesta's email, no, I didn't. Never once. Read me the quote and the source where I said that, where I predicted it. Yes, I said on Twitter, John Podesta's time in the barrel would come, meaning, yes, the media would focus on his shady business dealings in Eastern Europe, and indeed they did. There's the banking deal, the gas deal, the insurance deal, the uranium deal. You're familiar with those. So what we have here is twofold. We have a Democratic Party bent on a false narrative for which there is no proof, and a mainstream media that is content to push that narrative. But even worse, we have a Congress, including many Republicans, passing sanctions against the Russians to punish them for things that they can't even prove that the Russians did. Let's be as clear as possible. An organization called Protect Democracy, that is made up of a bunch of veterans from the Obama administration, have filed a lawsuit against me and against the president and against the president's campaign, claiming that we are complicit in the hacking of the Democratic National Committee by the Russians, and then helped the Russians give that information to WikiLeaks and Julian Assange. They can't even prove that the Russians hacked the DNC because they didn't. There's no evidence to prove that. If one looks at the speed of the download times of information that was stolen from the DNC, one reaches the conclusion that anything stolen from there was downloaded to thumb drives and taken out the back door. Motivation? Maybe if Deborah Wasserman Schultz and Hillary Clinton hadn't screwed Bernie Sanders out of the nomination, these Democrats, disgruntled as they were, wouldn't have stole that data and leaked it. That's the truth. And now, Deborah Wasserman Schultz, every man's first wife, is involved in a scandal far greater than anything that has been alleged about the Russians and Donald Trump. She hired 2 IT technicians who were Pakistani brothers, using taxpayer funds to hire them. They weren't consultants to her campaign, they were consultants to her office in Congress. She then induced 30 other members of Congress to hire these consultants, despite the fact that they seem to have a great absence of substantial, sophisticated IT experience. And lo and behold, the Capitol Hill police determined that they were not only stealing data, but stealing money through the House computer system, through the U.S. House of Representatives computer system. And when the Capitol Hill police formally informed Congresswoman Wasserman Schultz that they were under investigation and that a criminal investigation had been begun, she changed their status within the computer system from consultant to employee to guaranteed their continued access to the system so that they could continue to steal. This makes her an accessory. Jeff Sessions, wake up. Please, somebody, wake him up. Now, I have known Donald Trump for 40 years. Unlike most of the people in his cabinet and his White House staff, I actually voted for him. I believe in the president and I believe on a long experience with him, that when he has all the facts, that he makes the right decision. When he had all the facts in the case of our friend Sheriff Joe, he made the right decision. It is only when, yes, absolutely. It is only when the president doesn't have all the facts, or he has only some of the facts, or the facts he's been given are not facts at all, they are disinformation, that he is led to the wrong decision. And I would be remiss if I did not tell you that, yes, I am concerned about some around him. I am concerned that some of the people around him do not support his agenda, do not support his vision to make this country great again, do not support a reform agenda. But I put my faith in the president. And I'll tell you this, those who think you can isolate him, those who think you can cut him off from the outside world, those who think you can treat him like a mushroom, keep him in the dark and feed him shit, they don't know Donald Trump. Donald Trump is a naturally inquisitive guy. Donald Trump loves to work the telephone, probably better than any president since LBJ. Donald Trump will not be cut off from the American people. Donald Trump will not lose touch with flyover country, will not lose touch with the people who elected him. Now, he's going to be given some bad advice from time to time, but it is incumbent on us to use our voices. You heard Joy Villa, somebody I very much admire, because, folks, I can tell you, it's a lot it's a lot easier to hurt her in the business she's in than to hurt me in the business that I'm in. This is a woman of exceptional and enormous courage. This is someone who knows that in the arts and entertainment, she's in a hostile world, but she forges ahead, oblivious to the danger to herself or her career, because she believes in what we're trying to do here. She believes in making America great again. And therefore, my hat is off to her as a true warrior. Now, before I came here late yesterday, I spoke to my friend Alex Jones at InfoWars. And he wants you to know that he is with us today in solidarity. He is a strong supporter of this conference and the people that are here. He is a strong supporter of the president. And when he says that he fears that our president may be being medicated, this is not pulled out of the air as some conspiracy theory. The Russians colluded with Trump. There's a conspiracy theory if you want one. No, we have 4 different sources who have told us that they spoke to the president, and in the conversation, they felt his speech was slurred. Now, I know Donald Trump. He doesn't drink, not a drop, not even wine. He doesn't use drugs. He is a man of incredible energy who works around the clock for the American people. And therefore, there's nothing irresponsible or crazy about asking that question. This is not the Trump we know. The Trump I know is sharp as a tack. The Trump I know never misses a beat. The Trump I know knows exactly what's going on around him and knows who has his best interest, who has the country's best interest, and who does not. So I fear for my president, because not everybody around him has his best interests or the interests of the reform agenda at heart. So I ask you to pray with me for the safety of our president, for the safety of his family, for the safety of the future of this country. You see, the reason they attacked Donald Trump is very simple. Because he cannot be controlled, because he's beholden to no special interest. Nobody owns him. He can't be bullied. He can't be bought. He answers to only one person or people, the American people. And he feels strongly he's a patriot, as we are in this room. And therefore, he is a threat to the two-party duopoly, the Bushes and the Clintons, the Republican elites and the elites of the Democratic Party, who have run this country into the ground. What have they given us? the Bushes and the Clintons, the Republicans and the Democrats working together. Endless war where our inherent national interest is not clear. Erosion of our civil liberties where they read our emails, where they wiretap our phones, where they read our text messages. An immigration system that leaves our neighborhoods and streets unsafe. Trade agreements that have, as Ross Perot said years ago, sucked the jobs out of America, and an economy that is fragile at best. Now, I'm going to take this opportunity to talk about the single most important thing the president is trying to do. The single most important thing that I think he needs our support on, and that is his tax reform proposal. If we cut the tax rate on businesses, big and small, to 15%, below that of Mexico, below that of Canada, below that of China, below that of Japan, you will see the biggest boom, the greatest economic gain in U.S. history. And they will call it the Trump boom. Now, gutless, lily-livered, country club Republicans in the Congress will say, oh, you can't cut that deep. Maybe we should cut, a little bit here, a little bit there. No. It is essential that the president, if he must, run against both the Republicans and the Democrats, run against the insiders, run against the two-party duopoly who have had their chance. This is the single most important fight we face. If the president is allowed to follow his plan not only for tax reduction on business, but for inversion, bringing perhaps as much as trillions back into the country to be fairly taxed, to go to work for the American people, then no other issue will matter, and the president will have the revenues necessary to address our Veterans Administration problems. Here's the thing about Donald Trump. He doesn't operate off of polls. He doesn't operate off of focus groups. He doesn't operate off of roundtables. He doesn't operate off of speeches written by some 25-year-old speechwriter who puts words in his mouth. All of the issues on which he was elected, immigration reform, getting our NATO partners to finally pay their fair share, redoing these enormous trade agreements like NAFTA. These issues came from his heart. These issues came from his travels across this country. The reason he knows that our Veterans Administration is a disgrace and that the health care system for our veterans is the single greatest scandal in this country's history is because individual veterans or their relatives came to him and said, oh, Mr. Trump, my grandfather died waiting for medical treatment. My aunt died. My sister died. My mother died. My mother is gravely ill because of the mistreatment of the Veterans Administration. And therefore, his agenda is an agenda that is not a confection. It's not something whipped up by the pollsters to make him popular. He doesn't care about being popular. He cares about doing the right thing for America. Keep your faith in the president. I do. Pray for him as I do. Do not lose heart because he has a few people around him who do not seem to have his best interests at heart. When his chief economic advisor, Gary Cohn, you know him, formerly from Goldman Sachs, the bank that paid Hillary Clinton $675,000 for a secret speech, the bank that lent Ted Cruz over $1 million for his campaign, $1 million that he forgot to report as required by law, that Goldman Sachs. When he said that he was disgusted by the president's comments on Charlottesville and he considered resigning, here's my message for him. Gary, resign. Don't let the door hit you on the ass on the way out. And when General McMaster, our national security advisor, says in a meeting with the Israelis, Hezbollah is not a terrorist group. I say, what planet does this man live on? Time for him to go, too. By the way, for those of you who don't know, previous to his service in the Trump White House as a national security advisor, well, Mr. McMaster worked for a think tank funded by George Soros and his Open Societies Institute. Why is this man in the Trump White House? Somebody needs to ask Jared Kushner that question. When history looks back on it, you will realize that the firing of General Flynn, a good man, was a seminal event. And that opened the door to the globalists. That opened the door to the internationalists who would seek to co-opt the Trump agenda, both when it comes to foreign policy and domestic policy. So as the president said on election night, we won the election, but the fight is just beginning. Now, I've written several books. I'm happy to say that I'm a New York Times best-selling author. Thank you. If you have not read The Man Who Killed Kennedy, The Case Against LBJ, I commend it to you. If you have not read my book, Tricky Dick, The Rise and Fall and Rise of Richard Milhous Nixon, I commend it to you. But the point is, we have had presidents co-opted and removed before in our history when they challenged the established order. John F. Kennedy was removed because he wanted monetary reform, because he understood what was going on at the Central Intelligence Agency. Richard Nixon, not to say that Watergate was not a stupid mistake, it was, but good God, the man ended the war in Vietnam, he opened the door to the Chinese, and he reached a strategic arms limitation with the Soviets. He's a peacemaker. We've got to get rid of him. He displeased those in the deep state, the same exact people that oppose this president. Why are they opposed to Donald Trump? I'll tell you why. Because he's not in favor of thermonuclear war with the Russians over Syria. That's why. Because Hillary Clinton promised the boys at the Pentagon and the boys at Langley an expansion of the proxy war, maybe even a no-fly zone that would bring us right to World War III. Let's look at it objectively. How did Obama do with the Russians? Not too well. When they rolled into Crimea, you know what he did? Nothing. The reset? A joke. Yet they say we're not tough enough on the Russians? Donald Trump has no illusions about the Russian system. He knows it's bankrupt, that it's corrupt. He knows that they oppress Christians. He knows that they oppress gays. He knows that they oppress women. He knows it's a bankrupt system. He knows that Vladimir Putin is a killer. But he also knows that when you're going to try to negotiate with someone and world peace hangs in the balance, you don't start by kicking them in the balls. Donald Trump is in favor, like Richard Nixon, of détente. He knows these negotiations will not be easy. He knows that the path to peace will be difficult, but he also knows that peace and cooperation are better than war and devastation. So, I thank my friend Chuck, a great patriot. Some of you may know I was on the West Coast to speak originally at a cannabis expo in Los Angeles yesterday because I am one who believes the states should decide whether marijuana should be legal. And I was glad to see that Nevada has moved in the right direction on this issue. I'm also glad to see that Nevada is one of only 2 states that will require rigorous testing to make sure that molds and other harmful particles do not get included in what is allowed to be sold here. But like the president said in the campaign, let the states decide. Let the people decide. The large and growing number of veterans who are using cannabis instead of opioids to address the question of PTSD, well, as the president has said, the real drug abuse crisis in this country is opioid abuse. That's the issue. And it's a fact that in every state that has legalized cannabis, because of the will of the people, Opioid use has gone down, opioid-related crime has gone down, opioid-related incidents have gone down, as have all minor nonviolent crimes, and in many cases, violent crimes. So I came to the West Coast to speak on this issue. A group of dissidents who were ginned up by Media Matters for America objected to my speech at this Cannabis Expo in LA because I am a white supremacist or a bigot or a racist or an anti-Semite. I, of course, am none of those things. But they decided that I shouldn't speak based on my past incendiary comments, so they booked the Reverend Al Sharpton to speak. A man who once said if the Jews came to his home, he would pin their yarmulkes behind their ears. Now, because I'm a Christian, I've forgiven Reverend Sharpton for his intemperate marks, and he's apologized for his insults to Jews and Israel, and I take him at his word. But you see, there are different standards for those on the right and those on the left, and therefore I had no choice but to rent my own hall across the street from the Cannabis Expo, where I spoke yesterday at noon. You can find it online, about why I think liberals and conservatives, Republicans and Democrats, progressives, socialists, hell, I'll even work with communists if they're in favor of states' rights on the question of access to medicinal marijuana for the millions of Americans who find it beneficial. And I invite you to look at that online, and you might even want to look up the United States Cannabis Coalition, where I work with Judge Napolitano and Bill Maher from HBO and Congressman Matt Gaetz from Florida and others, both left and right, for a common sense approach to this important issue. I thank you for inviting me here today. I thank my friend Chuck. I'm going to be with you at dinner to salute that great patriot, Joe Arpaio. God bless you, and God bless America.
Roger's very much like Herman Cain. I wish he would just come out of his shell and tell us what he really thinks.
Well, I only know what I can tell you. 5 different people that I know, including a New York Times reporter, have told me
We'll have a seat over there.
in conversations with him, they felt that he... Oh, sorry. Oh, is that...
There you go.
The question was clarify my statement regarding the potential or possible medication of the president. I have no proof today that would hold up in a court of law. I do know at least 4 people who have spoken to him where they felt his speech was slightly slurred, one of them being a New York Times reporter, another one being a very prominent conservative publisher. And therefore I say exactly what I know. I've known him 40 years. I've never known him to slur his words. He definitely doesn't drink. He definitely doesn't use drugs, and he's a man of incredible energy. He sometimes will call you at 1:30, 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock in the morning, and he's still working, and you're sleeping. So it's a concern. No, I don't trust some of the people around him. Too many generals, in my opinion. I read 7 Days in May. I saw the movie. It's disturbing. I don't think General McMaster fits in this White House. He's a globalist. He is a sympathizer of Islamic terrorism, which he doesn't seem to take seriously. And he did say that Hezbollah was not a terrorist group. And then, of course, the White House tried to backtrack. He needs to be out the door right after Gary Cohn.
Wait, hang on. I get first dibs because I'm the host.
Fair enough.
This was, because I want you to talk about another aspect. I don't know, I had to go in and out of the room. Did you talk about your best dressed list at all, or does that come up yet?
I did not mention it.
Okay,
But
so we got to talk about that then, because since Roger took his coat off, I took mine off. I was so worried about coming to this event because this guy has his best dressed and worst dressed list. And if you make the worst dressed list, you are in big trouble. And I did not want to go there. A lot of people said, I've never seen you in a suit, Chuck. Well, I did not want to get on the wrong list here. But how did a political operative of your renown also become such a fashion expert?
Well, for many years, there was a designer in Hollywood named Mr. Blackwell. And Mr. Blackwell would every year compile a list of the best and worst dressed people in the world. And Mr. Blackwell's list had the ability to make or break your career. If you were a young starlet or a movie star or a socialite or a sportsman or a captain of industry. And he was very distinct in his opinions, and he could be quite pungent. Now, I started writing this list, which I publish on New Year's Day every year. This will be the 11th year for the list, and every year the list has gotten more coverage. And I'm not going to name any of the names of the people on the worst dressed list, Steve Bannon. And I'm not going to point out who else might be on the worst dressed list, Jesse Ventura. But I have picked up, as in my travels this year, some of the people who I can already see are going to be on next year's list. There's no question in my mind that Joy Villa will be on the list.
You go, girl.
Who knows? Robbie Olsen may even make the list. You know, this boils down to a philosophy of mine. Look good, feel good. If the world is a stage, then you ought to always be in costume. And it's an expression of how you feel about yourself, that you are fastidious in your dress, that you are well-groomed, and I think it is a requirement. I also am told that Dana Rohrabacher may be on the list for worst dressed this coming up, but I can't commit to that yet. So that explains it.
So tell me about Netflix. Get Me Roger Stone. I would have assumed that that would be a hit piece that would have just torn you to shreds. And I watched it the night it came out. I thought it was pretty fair, and I thought you came out looking pretty good. How in the hell did that happen?
Considering that this film was made by a bunch of hippie, beatnik, communist weirdos, it's pretty good. I actually think in their own misguided way, the folks at Newsweek think that Donald Trump will be a failure as president, and maybe we can blame his election on Roger Stone. I think this isn't going to come out the way they think it is. So if you haven't seen it, I commend it to you. It's interesting. It does talk about the fact that starting in 1988, I began to see that Donald Trump had the size and the independence and the courage, as it were, the cojones to be president, and that he was not owned by the elitists of either party, although he has, for most of his life, been a Republican, that his view towards the country, particularly on issues like NATO and immigration and our fragile economy, put him outside the two-party duopoly and the elitist views that have driven the country into the gutter. So it's really more than just the story of Roger Stone. It's a story about how the Trump presidency came to be. I wanted him to run in 1988. I wanted him to run in 2000. I wanted him to run in 2012. And thank God he did run in 2016 and won.
Okay. Bonnie.
Have you had any luck in either convincing or getting to Mr. Trump to have him pardon the Bundys?
It has been my policy since he was nominated for president not to talk about the frequency or content or scope or specifics of conversations I have had. But let me reassure you simply by saying, believe me, I am doing everything I possibly can to get justice for the Bundys and their supporters.
There we go. Mr. Jones.
You spoke about the people that around him that shouldn't be there. With Trump's brilliance, why is he permitting it? Why is he allowing it?
Well, I think he's gotten some bad advice from his son-in-law. I think he's gotten some bad advice from his daughter. I'm not attacking them. I actually think in their misguided view, they think that the advice they're giving him is actually in his best interest. You see, they would like him to be popular on the Upper West Side of Manhattan. They would like him to be popular in Malibu or out in the Hamptons. They don't understand that the hatred for our president is cultural as well as political. That he believes in virtues like hard work and patriotism. How quaint, how outdated, how old-fashioned. And that the liberal elite will never embrace him no matter what he does. So I think that unlike some of our presidents, Nixon, Johnson, come to mind, men who had seen the presidency up close, who understood the wheels of government and could tell you the 100 most important jobs to fill on day one. Our president comes to office from a different discipline. He comes from the world of business, where it's a lot easier to get things done and where you've got unilateral decisions, just make decisions and implement them. So there is some learning curve, and I think in some cases, in all candor, he's gotten bad advice. But as I said in the beginning, in my long experience with him, when he has all the facts, he almost always makes the right decision.
You know, in the documentary, they mention on numerous occasions Stone's rules. Yes. And I've seen Stone's rules written. Occasionally you have Stone's rule number or whatever. I don't even know if they're numbered or not. And I know there isn't really an official Stone's rules list, or at least the last time you and I talked, there wasn't. Is there going to be another book or an actual list explaining all of Stone's rules?
Actually, Stone's rules will be published in October, at the end of October.
Okay.
In
And I
book
didn't
form.
know this was not a setup. I did not know.
And these are practical rules. Let me give you an example. If you're wearing a white suit, don't order the spaghetti.
Okay, that's a good one. Let me write these down. Hang on.
Or you never win on defense. Attack, attack, attack. Now, I stole that one from Winston Churchill, but it was appropriated first by Richard Nixon. Or how about one of my favorites? A man is not finished when he is defeated. He is only finished when he quits.
Love
The
it.
president is not a quitter. And that is among my favorite rules.
Okay. John.
John.
I want to echo what Chuck said about Get Me Roger Stone. It's an incredible documentary, and Roger, you are an American original. Two news events today, and I'd like you to comment on them. One is the White House has announced that President Trump will be going to Alabama for a giant rally supporting Senator Luther Strange, who was appointed to the Senate seat. I like Senator Strange, but he is the candidate of Mitch McConnell. And secondly, the Wall Street Journal is reporting just now that the White House is not going to withdraw formally from the Paris Climate Accord. Instead, it will seek to review and to try to renegotiate those terms.
I had seen neither one of those, but let me comment at least on the first one. The president's support for Luther Strange was an egregious mistake. It was a mistake in the first round in which there were 4 candidates, but the president was led to believe there were only 2. Luther Strange is staving off corruption scandals that will curl your ears. The State Ethics Commission managed to get by the primary before ruling on allegations of bribery. There are also allegations that he utilized state funds to reimburse the travel expenses of his mistress. Those are yet to be seen. We could actually, believe it or not, lose this seat in the general election to a Democrat. But you certainly don't discipline the Senate Republicans by endorsing Luther Strange because he's Mitch McConnell's candidate. This is a classic example of the president getting terrible advice. On the second question, I hope that that report is false or wrong. I'm not questioning you. But it would be extraordinarily disappointing because if you look at the president's record so far, his decision not to go forward in Paris remains among the high points of his administration to date. So I'm going to reserve judgment until I get a chance to read more. But that is very disturbing, and thank you for your endorsement of Get Me Roger Stone. Yes, sir.
This morning coming into this meeting, I was listening to Breitbart Radio, and they had Dr. Sebastian Gorga on, who we know is still a very strong Trump advocate.
A good man.
Yeah, a good man. And basically what he was saying was, you know, up to this point, the president trusted the people he appointed to get the job done and to give him the right advice. But now he's realizing that they gave him bad advice, and that the president, like he's prone to do, will take charge and kick the butts himself, and he will fire people. And he said that you're going to start to see, between now and Christmas, you're going to start to see a lot of heads roll, and the president's going to fire people personally. What do you think about that?
Well, I hope that Dr. Gorka is right. I do think this would be a perfect example that there are many instances in which he has been given bad advice, or where people are trying to undo the precepts of Trumpism. I mean, the whole Russian question, for example, is really about doing through the congressional or judicial system what they couldn't achieve at the ballot box last November, to essentially unelect the president. But he is a good executive. He can listen, and he does need to understand that while his base is fervent, he can stretch the base. It is somewhat elastic, but at a certain point it will break. If he does not keep faith with those who elected him, his new friends will not support him as much as they might applaud individual actions that they goad him into. And those in the revolution, those in these rooms, we do not have infinite patience. We want Trump to be Trump. We didn't elect Jared Kushner.
Right. All right, got time for one or two more? Nope, that was it?
One other follow-up, if I could.
Go.
Our man Rex Tillerson,
Yes.
he said some things lately that I think are almost a slap in the face to our president. What do you think his wheelbase is right now?
Well,
Is
I
he
mean,
on thin ice?
This disturbs me. I watched Steve Bannon's interview with 60 Minutes. First of all, why can't he shave? I don't quite understand this.
Well, they tried to make him look bad.
Well, but you know what? They didn't tell him not to shave, so he could start by shaving. Guy looked like he was up freebasing all night. And the button-down shirt inside the button-down shirt. What's with that? But putting that aside, he said the Bush people were idiots in their running a foreign policy. Why then did Steve push Condoleezza Rice's candidate for Secretary of State, Rex Tillerson? Condoleezza Rice is running your State Department today, folks. If a journalist like John Fund will go downstairs and look at the book where you have to sign in at security, you'll find that she's at the State Department most days. What is she doing there? If you look at these assistant secretaries, you won't find any Trump supporters. So I am very disappointed in Tillerson. I liked his reputation as a can-do executive, as a believer in free enterprise, but I think at the end of the day, when he decided to separate himself from the president on Charlottesville, saying the president spoke only for himself, he should have been fired that afternoon. Many of you will not remember this, but when President Nixon was in office, the Secretary of Interior, Walter Hickel, criticized something the president said on Vietnam, and he was gone within hours. When you serve at the pleasure of the President of the United States, you have an obligation to air your differences internally, not in the media. So Tillerson, as far as I'm concerned, he can join Cohn and McMaster. He'd be the third guy out the door.
All right, let's wrap up with this.
The wall. Fourth, Kushner should be first.
What?
I said he should be the fourth.
Oh, okay. So let me ask you to wrap this up. Peer into your crystal ball and tell us how you think this whole Russian collusion thing is going to end up at the end. Is it going to hurt the president? Is he going to be completely exonerated? Are you going to be as honest and frank when you testify as you have been here today? Okay, you don't have to answer the last one. I know that one. But how do you think, I mean, just at the very end, what's it going to be?
Well, I think it goes nowhere. I think basically the Democrats would like to figure out some way to end this because the ultimate result is embarrassment. I'm sure all of you saw a couple weeks ago where the FBI conducted a raid on Paul Manafort's house, Paul Manafort being the former chairman of the Trump campaign. Manafort did not collude with the Russians. Manafort had no contact with the Russians. Manafort's work for a democratic political party in Ukraine is perfectly legal. Our State Department, our government recognized the results of that election until Hillary Clinton took a payoff and they were allowed to run the democratically elected president of Ukraine out of office at the point of a gun. Not impeachment, not an election, but violence, mob violence. So I can tell you exactly what's going on. They seek to find something in Paul Manafort's business or political career, some minor wrongdoing, or something that is nothing that they can turn into something. Tax evasion, money laundering, some other bogus charge, so that they can say, all right, Paul, all you've got to do is admit that you were colluding with the Russians and that Donald Trump knew everything, and we won't prosecute you. In other words, they want him to be John Dean. They want him to be a rat. They want him to lie. They want him to bear false witness against the president. I've known Manafort for 50 years. He was an usher in my wedding. I was among those who recommended him to come to the convention and save Donald Trump from having the nomination stolen from him in the Rules or the Credentials Committee. We've seen this before. Most of you are too young to remember this, others are not. Robert Taft showed up in Chicago with more than enough votes to be nominated for president, and they stole that nomination from him in the Credentials Committee by unseating the Taft delegates in Texas and Louisiana, seating Eisenhower delegates, and that's how Ike got nominated. And it could have happened again. Despite the fact that Trump had run the tables in the primaries, people have forgotten. We had lost Wisconsin, we had lost Colorado, we had lost North Dakota, and the delegates in Louisiana had just been stolen from us, despite the fact that Trump won that primary going away. This is, by the way, the legacy of Corey Lewandowski. And that is why Paul Manafort stepped into the campaign at a pivotal time, and he is among the most experienced convention operatives in the country, a very small and dwindling group of people who know how these things work. And he is, like me, an Italian-American. He is tough as nails, and he will not betray his president, no matter how much Mueller squeezes him to tell a lie. He will not lie. So the Russian collusion delusion, as I like to call it, is a fraud. And on the September 26th, when I testify, I will help illustrate that. By the way, I was very interested to see that Comey released his testimony in written form in advance. Very interesting. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Roger. I appreciate it. Will anybody else be watching Roger on September 26th? I think so. Thank you, my friend.